As we near the spooky season, more and more darker films are being released. This time, I'm looking at It Lives Inside. It's got an intriguing aspect to it, but does it fully work? An Indian American teenager struggling with her cultural identity has a falling out with her former best friend, and in the process, unwittingly releases a demonic entity that grows stronger by feeding on her loneliness. This starts out very enigmatically. There's some odd and unsettling imagery, which ends in an arm that looks like it's being burned from the inside out. And then this dark jar, just on a very nasty and filthy floor, is sitting there. We then flash to a teenager named Sam, who clashes with her mom because Sam is embracing more and more of an American identity and seemingly discarding her Indian heritage. Now, the tension and the stress here, it's a necessary foundation for the rest of the narrative because the entire premise of this haunting, supernatural, demonic storyline is that the being, or presence, or entity, just whatever it is that wreaks terror, it needs loneliness, isolation, fear, and despair to survive. So Sam, having this tense and strained relationship with her mom, is one of the ways that we're going to watch this void grow. To make this a horror and thriller, there is some sort of specter that exists, and I really appreciate the less is more approach that the filmmakers take, where the entity isn't shown except for very brief and partial views. Usually, we only get a glimpse of maybe glowing eyes in this utterly dark space, or a black appendage creeping in the periphery. And most of the time, the minimalism works to amp up the creepiness and then establish dread. So many times, what we are shown is brief and gone in an instant, creating shivers, but also doubt on whether or not something was actually there or if it was a figment of the character's imagination. There are also a lot of slow camera and character movements that help to increase the suspense, especially as ominous music just ramps up, creating anxiety and apprehension. But sometimes it's just a tease, which then makes each instance this guessing game of whether or not something terrible will happen. Now, I like the uncertainty in not knowing when something would actually appear or not. Eventually, though, we do get to see a bit more of the entity, and the practical effects and creature design, they are brutal and nasty, creating this demon-like being that is definitely nightmare fuel. Now, the practical effects, they're actually some of the best things about this movie. They create the threatening and sinister atmosphere that's necessary to establish chills and maintain disquiet throughout the story. Megan Suri, who plays Sam, is charismatic and engaging, and she adequately conveys fear and despair mixed with the snarky attitude that you'd expect from a teenager. She's sympathetic at points, but also struggles sometimes to be relatable or deserving of worry because she can come across as self-centered and dismissive of others. Now, as much as I love the concept of this, there are some shortcomings that stand out. Now, one is the pacing. While the story does include a lot of moments of anxiety or scares, parts of this 99-minute movie feel long. And I think that's because there's a little meandering the narrative takes while Sam encounters this rinse and repeat cycle of experiences. I love the meaning that these scenes have for the overall story, but the repetition does get to be a bit tiresome. This also relies at points on some of the now standard visual tropes within horrors. When Sam encounters a freaky looking character, the being contorts into crab walking on all fours within their hair covering their face while chasing after Sam or maybe even another character. I mean, this is still a little unsettling, but it's not overly scary or freaky. In fact, it's just overused in horrors, especially in the last 10, maybe 15 years. But somehow it's still a bit effective in giving me the heebie-jeebies. Now, there are a lot of dark and dim scenes, and most of the time these work to enhance the aesthetic. Sometimes it just made the action difficult to see. I mean, it's a shame to craft a sequence that will instill fear or even jumps, and then hide everything in such a darkness that we can't actually see what's happening. Now, luckily, this wasn't the norm throughout the movie, but it was present and then disappointing. For the editing, the story feels choppy, and that's mainly because of this go to black transition that is used throughout. These work sometimes, but they also become a crutch to transition to another scene, making it feel like a bunch of vignettes that tell the story, and then they just lack a scene that all ties them in together. Now, something will be happening to a character, and then the screen will go black, and we see then the character waking up. How did they get there? What actions took place during that blackout? These transitions, they don't ruin the movie, but they do feel lazy, and ultimately have an effect on the overall enjoyment and engagement with the story. Now, the themes of loneliness and isolation, they're excellent for reinforcing the narrative. There are relatable emotions and experiences that can help to draw people within the story. I wish that it could have been examined even more with Sam and her friend Tamira and then her family, but there is enough to get an understanding of what's at play. I think the movie had the opportunity to be darker in tone, which would then create more dread, more unease, and ultimately more chills. And probably part of the reason, the story doesn't delve as deep into the bell jar as it could is that this is a PG-13 movie. So even though there is some violence and even blood, it's not a lot. And most of the terrifying actions happen off screen. And a lot of them, I think they still work because of the setups, but I do think that if the story had gone further down that rabbit hole of despair, this could have been palpably horrifying and dreadful. Overall, I had fun with It Lives Inside. Megan Suri captures the angst and loneliness of a teenager struggling to find her identity while battling the fear that something evil is haunting her. The pacing is a little uneven and the transitions are lazy, but the practical effects, they are a standout, with creature designs that are the stuff of nightmares. This could have been a much darker film with more focus placed on the central themes of loneliness and isolation, but it still creates an ominous atmosphere that's entertaining and unsettling. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and a lot of violence. I give It Lives Inside 3.5 out of 5 couches. So, what are some horror movies that you are looking forward to watching? I mean, these can be films that are going to release, or maybe ones that you just save for Halloween. I'd love to know what you're watching in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.